Welcome to a Good Enough Lap Guide in the Ford Mustang GT4 at Road Atlanta in the wet. Your lap guide to move up through the splits. The purpose of this video is to give you guys a foundation that you can build solid, consistent laps off of. If you get to the point where you can run those laps in a race with the goal to finish the race, you will move up through the splits. First, we'll talk about the track characteristics of Road Atlanta. Elevation changes, a lot of twists with the long straight. The fact that we're driving the track in the wet does present some challenges that we don't see in the dry. There are some curbs we don't want to go on because they get super slit. The main takeaway when driving in the wet is that you're going to want to brake earlier and you're going to want to make sure you hit your apexes. It's going to take a lot of patience. There are a couple passing opportunities on the track. The first would be coming out of 12 going into turn 1. And then coming out of turn 5 or coming out of the S's going into turn 6. And the last and the most obvious is coming out of turn 7 going into turn 10A. Unless you're driving the Porsche, you're never going to pass someone on that straight. Next, we'll talk about the car characteristics of the Mustang GT4 while driving it in the rain. When you drive in the rain, it's going to accentuate the flaws of the car. So if you overdrive the entry of the car, it's going to push like no other. That's why it's really important to back up your braking points so then you can hit your apexes. If you drive in hard at all, you're just going to push, you're going to push, you're going to push, you're going to push. And then when we get to the middle of the corner, that's when you can start thinking about getting on the throttle. Some corners you can actually get on the throttle before we get to the middle of the corner, like the big sweepers. And then when you're coming out of the corner, it is going to have oversteer and it's going to be accentuated due to the rain. So you just have to be really aware of that. And one last thing to note, while you're driving in the rain, it's going to take you a lot longer to warm up the tires. Where typically it takes 2, maybe 3 laps in the normal conditions. In the rain, when the track's 65 degrees, it's wet, water absorbs a ton of heat, so it just takes a lot longer for those tires to warm up. You probably won't have the tires warmed up till lap 4 or 5. Now I'm going to tell you what the weather and the lap time was for this lap, but you got to remember the conditions are always changing, so this lap time really doesn't mean anything. It's really about how you adapt to the changing conditions and being able to recognize if the conditions are getting worse, you need to back it down. If the conditions are getting better, you can start to push a little bit harder. The weather for this lap was 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius. The track temp was 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18.33 degrees Celsius. The lap time was a 136.365. Sector 1 was a 14.803. Sector 2 was a 28.398. Sector 3 was a 27.177. And Sector 4 was a 21.725. All right, let's get into the lap. Turn 1, your braking point's going to be at the 200 marker. And you're going to notice with the braking trace, I'm not using a ton of brake. We're just using more distance to slow down in a much more controlled fashion. Then our turn-in point will be as the grass ends on the left. And you need to be really patient. You need to make sure you hit that braking point, because if you don't, you're just going to push wide. The front tires are going to have zero grip. Then our apex will be a middle-late apex. You can just barely kiss the curb. You really don't want to go over it. And then on exit, you're just going to want to ease on the throttle. That's going to be a general practice out of every corner. You're going to want to wait till you got the wheel pretty straight before you really get on it. And then there's no obvious braking point for turn 3, but this is where I brake. And then we're going to want to hug the white line, don't get on the curb. Again, you'll notice as I'm braking how gentle I am being with applying the brake pressure. These are probably the smoothest brake curves you'll ever see out of me because you just have to be so sensitive with all your inputs. And then it'll be a middle apex for the corner, as you can see on the top left, and you can go over the curb. Then for turn 4, we're just going to hug the curb. You do not want to get on the curb like we do in the dry. It's really slick and you'll just spin out. And pay attention to my throttle inputs here, how smooth I'm being as I'm going around the corner. I'm not mashing the throttle, I'm just being really delicate with my inputs. For the first part of the S's, we're going to start to brake where this alternative track rejoins the main track and right towards the end of it. And then you'll notice I just barely brake. We're mostly coasting on the downhill section here. And as for the apex, it's going to be a middle apex. You don't want to go over the curb, you can touch it. And as we're going through this bottom section, you want to be really delicate with your throttle application. If you're too aggressive here, it will spin out on you. For the next part of the S's, you can go over the curb. Just try and keep the car nice and straight. And then for the setup for turn 5, we'll just barely get on the curb. You really don't want to get on it much more than I did, or it unsettles the car and it just makes the exit really hard. And then for turn 5, it's going to be a late apex and we do not want to get on the curb. Once again, notice how gentle I'm being with the throttle. As we're coming off the corner, these curbs on the outside are really slick, so you have to be very careful if you're going over them. I don't like to put both wheels over them, just the right side tires. Wait for the car to get straighter before you really get on the gas. If you guys are enjoying this video, please hit that thumbs up button. I appreciate it. For turn 6, we're going to brake about 30 feet before the access on the left and the barrier. And then our turn-in point for the corner is going to be right before that white line going across the track. It'll be a middle late apex for the corner, and you can just barely kiss the curb. Turn 8, your braking point is going to be as the car starts floating back out towards the curb. And this is where your turn-in point is going to be. And it'll be a middle late apex for the corner. You can go over the curb, just be again really gradual with your throttle application coming out of the corner. If you guys are finding this video useful, hit that subscribe button. I'm doing them every week. Now we're coming on the back stretch. The Mustang's going to do alright here. The BMW is definitely the car to beat. And wave to your Porsche friends as you go by. We're carrying a ton of speed and it's wet, so we're going to brake real early, with the braking point being where the blue tint is on the right. Now the car does get twitchy here under braking, so make sure you're just not too far to the right, because if it does twitch and it pulls you a little bit to the right, you don't want to end up in that grass because you'll just keep going. And then our turn-in point for the corner is going to be about 10 feet past the white line going across the track. And then it'll be a middle apex for the corner. Notice how I'm not on the throttle when I go over the curb. And then for turn B, it's going to be a middle late apex. Notice how I actually lift off the throttle when I go over the curb, and then when I get back on the throttle, I wait for the car to really start to straighten out before I get back on it. Now as we come over the crest, the car is going to be all kinds of twitchy. You just have to get used to it. The biggest thing is making sure you get back to the outside of the track where this curb ends on the left for your turn in into the next corner. You also notice that's my lifting point. We're going to have to roll through the corner, be very patient before we get back on the gas. If you don't, you're just going to push out wide and you're going to miss your apex. As we're getting to the midpoint of the corner, this is where we're going to start rolling back on the throttle, and then it'll be a late apex for the corner. You can just barely hit the curb. And that's your good enough lap guide in the Ford Mustang GT4 at Road Atlanta in the wet. If you guys like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe. I'm doing these every week, and I'll see you in the next one.